Good morning, Ally.
Hello, my friend. How are we?
I am good. I am delightful. And you know what? I am even more delightful because you and I are meeting each other for the first time in person in a couple of weeks, which can you believe it?
Oh my goodness gracious.
Yeah.
People, you have no idea the
Hmm.
amazingness that's about to ensue here.
I
It is
can't.
so rare that I get to meet some of my favorite people in this digital space, like in
Mhm.
the flesh. So I am pumped. And
Same.
so while we're on that note, we're just going to give a little shout out to why we're meeting in person, which is that we have a mutual client who is launching her very first memoir. The actual official date is the 30th of this month. That's Christiana Scarpino. Her memoir, Missing Pieces, is coming out. We are so stoked for her, and she's doing a live book launch party in New Jersey, which happens to be not that far from either of us,
It is not.
which is why we are getting in the car and we are going. And so not only do we get to be there in celebration of her and her fabulous work in this divine book, but also we get to hang out with each other.
I know. And can coordinate outfits. Like we've got a whole plan in place. Yes.
Oh my gosh, so exciting. So yeah,
Yeah.
that is ridiculously cool. Minus the 6 hours, I think, that I have to drive straight early
Yeah.
Monday morning to get there on time.
Mine's less than 3, so I feel I don't want to rub it in too much, but this is what happens when you're living so far north in Vermont. Like that's
I
just the
know,
nature of
I
the beast.
know. I would totally be going a little bit the day before, but I have a family wedding Saturday afternoon, which is kind of making it not possible to get going until the following day. So
Yeah,
it's okay. Totally going to be worth it. And I do some of my best thinking when I'm alone in the car.
I do too, actually. Like I enjoy being alone in the car. I've been alone in the car this week more times than I can count, and traipsing half the state of Connecticut this week for just different meetings. And I have an hour drive later this afternoon, which hour is not bad, but it's been like multiple hours every day in the car. And I'm like,
That's a lot.
what is happening this week in the universe? That
Yeah.
it's the week I'm planning to leave for vacation, and then also like have all these meetings that are not nearby. It happens. It is what it is.
The thing that happens. So before we get going, as you can tell, this is Unscripted with Ally and Jenn, and we are already unscripted. But if you are joining us today, especially for this topic that I know a lot of people are thinking about in a variety of different ways, please let us know in the comments that you are here. We would love to know that we have live people breathing somewhere in the world, listening to us and wanting to engage in this topic. And as always, we welcome your comments, your questions, your aha moments as we dive into today's topic, which is book banning, censorship, First Amendment right issues, and that old chestnut.
What are you, 103?
Well, I feel like now that I've done a little bit of research on like what's the historical analysis of book
Yeah.
banning in the world, like it is kind of an old chestnut, like because it goes back a really long way, actually. But
Yeah.
we won't start there. Let's start with what the hell is it to begin with? Like what's book banning?
I feel like I'm going to toss that to you to start, since you did go down this very lengthy research rabbit hole and will be far more concise than I will be.
I did. So to keep it as succinct as possible, because there's lots of different avenues we could take this conversation. So basically, the banning of books is when they are removed, restricted, or prohibited from a variety of different outlets. So that could be schools, it could be libraries, or it could be stores. And the people who are restricting them are usually a body of people. So it could be organized groups, it could be government officials, it could be a school board, for example. So these are people in decision-making power, leadership power, policy-making power. And it's not necessarily always due to things that you might think. So typically what we see in terms of patterns and trends are that the types of books that are being banned often tend to focus on things that are challenging or difficult ideas that not all majority people lean against. So we often see a lot of books that are about race or gender identity or sexuality or certain aspects of history being challenged and therefore added to a banned list of books. How's that for definition?
I think that sounds like a great definition. And, I think that because there's the banning aspect, and books have always been banned. I think that is something that we
Yeah.
I think sometimes we live in such a digital age now where everything is so quick to know what is happening versus in the past times when a book might be banned. I feel like it would be like almost fascinating to be like plop ourselves in the 80s even, or even in the 90s as like the adults that we are now, and to see what book banning looked like then, because it absolutely was happening then. It was just happening in like siloed ways versus now it is such a more digitally coordinated large spread effort. And I
Mhm.
feel like that feels like it's a contributing factor to why, things are on such an intense rise so quickly these days.
Well, I also think too, like the digital age has allowed us to know things that are happening in other places.
Mhm.
And so then the frequency or the magnitude of something also feels greater because you know about it. Whereas before, like you were isolated to whatever community or town or state you were in. So you
Mhm.
might only know what's happening there, not necessarily what's happening globally. Right.
Yeah.
So there's that aspect too. So since you kind of like brought up like the lightly the history of book banning and that it isn't just something that's happening now. My little ChatGPT research, kind of dates book banning back to actually like antiquity and the Middle Ages. So there was actually the burning of books and burning of scholars in ancient China in like third BCE.
Mhm.
Like, and way back then, it was a way to try to consolidate political control. And then there are episodes of book banning that actually go through the early modern era, the 18th to 19th centuries, the 20th century, into where we are now, right? And so we see places along our whole kind of global history of humans where this has reoccurred. If we look at the early modern era, right, so there's the printing press revolution, right? So this is where we're now starting to get like written word in print, right? And so now we've got mass reproduction of information, right, kind of for the first time. And this starts to alarm the people who are leading, either the people or people in the churches, so monarchs and church leaders, right? And then we get in 1559 the Catholic Church's official list of banned books actually lasts until 1966, right? So that's a pretty long time frame to have a book ban, right, on particular types of titles.
Yeah.
If we get into kind of like the Enlightenment era with Voltaire and Rousseau, the calls for free speech grow, but the bans persist on particular groups of people whose thought we're trying to squash.
Yeah.
I think for like our generation or, people living in the last 80 years or whatever, the one that they'd probably be more familiar with would be like Nazi Germany,
Mhm.
where they were burning books that were targeted, Jewish and Marxist authors and ideas, right? Which was definitely a part of trying to cleanse certain ideas or voices,
Mhm.
right? Based on who was coming into power and what their agenda was.
Mhm.
So, this concept, this idea is not a new idea, right? This has been happening throughout our history. So the question really becomes, well, what about why now? Like, why is it on the rise at this moment, right? We're kind of seeing history in the making in a variety of ways.
Mhm.
So why is it on the rise today?
You know what I find interesting in thinking about like the history is that when we look at the history of book banning, it was book burning, right? Like that was what was happening, is that they were burning these books in large quantities because access to books used to be so much more difficult, right? Like even in times where like only the elite had access to books because it was so difficult to produce them and to get them into the hands of, like the elite people who needed them. So then if you like fast forward to where we are now, where, even 20 years ago with the kind of the beginning of self-publishing, really, not to say that there weren't things happening before then, but like the real like mainstream self-publishing avenues. If we look at traditional publishing, they have been the gatekeepers, they have been the censors, they have been all of the things for decades and decades, because it's been the traditional publishers who've decided whose voices get heard. And I feel like with the no restrictions and almost like the lawlessness and no rules, where anyone can publish whatever they please about whatever they please in whatever way they please. And I feel like there's obviously like what's actually happening in our country in real time that is a huge contributing factor to why there's a lot of censorship and banning. But I also think it's just almost like the pendulum is swinging within the industry, because for so long, all of the entities that you were talking about before, whether it's school boards or government or different officials, or people who had some kind of stake in what material was being released versus isn't, there's no control over that anymore. Like, there's truly no control over that. Whereas before, maybe traditional publishing could have been swayed in different directions of what they should and should not publish, versus self-publishing has just busted that door wide open. And now anyone can say whatever they want. And so it feels like, to me, the book banning is increasing more because there's more people. It's more of a, like, the resistance is much more clear and obvious now, because you might be able to ban, like, I think it was Pen America that said that there was over 10,000 books banned that was the number, right, in 2024. I want to make sure I got that right. Pen America's
been more like two something.
Hold on. I just want to make sure it's accurate. But my point being is that if you have a small amount of books that even have the potential of being banned because they've already been curated and censored, getting to the point of being a book, and now you have millions and millions and millions of books, it feels like the numbers are rising so exponentially. And the reality is that might be rising with just the number of books that are there, because you can ban one, you can censor one, and there's 50 others that are talking about the same thing that you're not really doing anything with. So it's almost like the banning and censorship just feels so like laser pointed to specific authors. But the reality is that you're never going to like censor that voice completely. It's just not possible in the age in which we live.
That's a really interesting point, right? Because there's such an ability to just produce in volume, right, books and content and ideas. Yeah, you can target some based on whatever criteria or agenda that you have, but what's the likelihood of being able to squash all the voices on all the same ideas, right? You would be searching endlessly.
Yeah, and there's like the digital component.
There's a what component?
There's the digital component, and then there's like the print component, right? So like the digital censorship is happening now through algorithms, right? Where it's way more subtle, where it's like, oh, here's this queer author of color whose book just somehow doesn't seem to make its way up in the search engine. So there's like real subtle ways of doing it that are harder to prove, that are happening. But also at the same token, like if your book gets censored or kicked off Amazon, even if you're writing about hate speech, which obviously is nothing that you or I would endorse, but there are people who are 100% producing hate speech, and those can still be printed by somebody and still be distributed by handing them to people. And even those, you'll never be able to burn all of them or censor it. So it's like, it just seems like a raging fire that is occurring, that they're like just kind of throwing like little buckets of water here and there, trying to like make it actually put the fire out. And the reality is that I don't think that there's like no way to stop it. It's like a runaway train.
Yeah. So I think, this brings up a lot of things that kind of overlap, right, with like free speech in the First Amendment. And supposedly, right, that's one of the things that we're all supposed to have the right to. I mean, here specifically, is the right to express ourselves, to share our ideas, knowing that if all of us have that right, then we're going to end up with a diversification of thought, right, and opinion. And so it's interesting, like it's always interesting to me, like who gets to be the body that decides these ideas are okay and these ideas are not, when the very nature of the First Amendment's like freedom of speech, right, is that regardless of the thought or the idea, you have the ability to express it, right? Unless, of course, it's a protected level of speech.
Sure.
Right. So your hate speech categories. So it's like, some groups, organizations are getting twirled up about the concepts or ideas in certain texts, right? But by the nature of getting all twirled up on those and wanting to get rid of them, you're violating right? The right that you also have to disagree. You have the right to disagree. You have the right to not want to read those texts or want to engage with that material for your own purposes, for your own belief systems or feelings or whatever. But why can you not accept if this person can share their ideas and that's okay, and you can also share your ideas? Would you want somebody to come and say that you don't have the right to say the thing that you believe? I just feel like a lot of the times the deciding bodies are a little bit hypocritical. You see, you be a tiny amount, to say like, no, this idea should not be distributed or spread or whatever. But you also kind of know that like, if you said to them, well, we don't want your ideas here either, we would be at a crossroads. Nobody said anything. If nobody shared any opinion or any perspective, right? Like we would all be a little bit lost because everything is based on the connection of ideas and perspectives and how those things shift and change the way that we show up in the world and the things that we create, for better or for worse, right? Everything is generated by idea and thought and how those things turn into systems and processes and policies and whatever. So like, we're not really doing ourselves any favors.
I don't think we are in any direction on any side. I don't think any of this is helpful, because I think the hypocrisy is a huge piece of that, right? And I think that it's also with like who's screaming the loudest. It just feels like it's people out there screaming in a void. So yes, there might be one person controlling a certain type of book being banned that's just out there screaming about it being banned. And that doesn't even mean that everybody's even hearing it. So I think that's the thing about book banning too, is that it might be that a library, like a book is now banned from a library because a town meeting decided that this book is not suitable for its residents of said town. The residents of said town, I would be willing to bet 80% of the people of that town have no idea this even happened. You know what I mean? Because people are so civically disengaged as it is, that unless someone is out there yelling about it, like, oh my God, this book is banned, are people even going to notice that the book ever left the shelf to begin with? And I feel like from a marketing standpoint, I feel like when your book is banned, like it just gives it so much more power, because now it's like, ooh, why was it banned? What was so salacious about this book that it had to be censored and had to be taken down? Now it can't be accessed by the public library. That it's almost like our topic is, should I be concerned about book banning? And I personally don't think anyone should be concerned about it, because I feel like if your book is banned, it actually makes it better, because there's a lot of bookstores and libraries who have shelves that are like, here's the banned book list. And those are books that may never have been in the front of that store to begin with. But now they are, because trying to prove a point of, yes, just because you're trying to ban it over here, no one actually cares what you have to say. We're doing our own thing anyway.
Two things that come to mind. One, piggybacking off of what you're saying, is like when books make it onto that list, I feel like that is almost like waving a neon sign at bookstores to be like, and now we're going to set up our book banning shelf where we highlight all of the books that have now made it onto that list that otherwise might have just been shoved in with all the other books and completely overlooked. So thank you for pointing us in the direction of which ones we should be highlighting, right? So there's that aspect, but then the other aspect is, before you even get there, again, piggybacking off this idea of like, you're actually drawing more attention to these books. I don't think that the books that are being banned for certain reasons, we'll say sexual orientation or race, right? If you're not somebody who believes in anything outside of heteronormativity, you're probably not going and looking for books on other sexual orientations, right? If you don't believe that there's, anything wrong with race relations, then you're probably not going and looking for that book that's so upsetting with all of its content inside, right? You won't even know what that book says because that book doesn't grasp you in any way, right? Because it's either not a part of your ideology or your belief system or whatever, or maybe it's not the type of book you like to read. You're like, oh my God, I don't want to read anything else nonfiction because my brain is going to explode with the amount of stuff that is out there right now that I can't decipher. So I'm going to go find myself to the fiction section, right? And I'm not even going to be paying attention to any of these things. And that's not to say that there aren't fiction books also being banned for a variety of thematic reasons. But the point here really being that, you know, the books being banned are likely not being read by the people you're trying to protect from those ideas.
Correct. Like that is ideas, right? Like books. You have to open the book to read the book. You have to like physically, willingly. There's no non-consensual book reading happening, right? So like you have to like pick the book up and look at the words yourself and digest that information. So no one is forcing you. Yes, I think an argument could be made in school settings, right? Where there's books that are part of curriculum. Sure.
Right.
We're not talking about that at this particular moment. We are talking about just general broad banning that is occurring. Although a lot of the banning that is happening is in school settings. And that is a whole different kind of can of worms and not quite the authors that you and I are necessarily serving in what we do in this world.
Right. Right. I do think it's interesting that you said that you don't think that people should be concerned about book banning, but I'm guessing what you mean is you don't think authors should be concerned about book banning.
Yes, yes, that is a very big distinction. I appreciate you bringing that up. Yes, authors. I don't think you as the one authoring the work should be concerned. I think people broadly should absolutely be concerned about the fact that banning is happening. Yes.
Right. I'm glad that we made that distinction because I do think that like this is calling into question, right? The idea of who has the right to censor, who has the right to free speech, who's controlling the narrative. How does book banning affect the kind of reversal of trying to allow marginalized and diverse voices to actually be seen and speak? And even bigger than that, like how do we come together as humans, regardless of lens or identity? How do we come together as humans if we don't understand each other's experiences? Right?
Yeah.
And to me, whether it's books or blog posts or long form articles or whatever, right? Written content has the ability to allow us to see an alternative perspective that we otherwise wouldn't have because we will only ever live within our body, right? So if I want to empathize and truly understand another person who has a very different identity and experience than me, and I'm not comfortable asking somebody outright, which a lot of us wouldn't be, like, how do you even break into that conversation if you don't know them well? I'm always going to turn to a book written by a person that has that experience that I don't, right? Doesn't mean that I have to subscribe to everything that they say. It doesn't mean that I might not still have questions, right, about everything that they've been through. But it gives me a window in. And I feel like what we are lacking through all of this censorship, banning, whatever, is the possibility for growth and learning and the possibility to connect on something that is greater than our supposed beliefs or predetermined beliefs of like the families we were brought up in, the communities we were brought up in, whatever things have been passed down to us. We have the opportunity through reading, through books, through story, right, to potentially walk in another person's shoes, which actually might make us better collectively as humans. And I also think it just points to, rather than figuring out how to have civil discourse and figure out how to talk about our differences, we just all want to shout about which one of us is right.
Yeah. And if we look at the systems and the powers that be, that's what they want. It's almost like the less educated, and I don't necessarily mean like education, but the less informed we are, the less educated we are, the less of an opinion we have, the less of a belief that we have, the easier we are to control and manipulate. And if we look at the powers that be, whether present day, whether going back to whatever you said with China, like in BCE, that's always been the case. it's always been the case that those who are in power want to control the people that are technically within their domain. And the way that we can do that is by lack of information, lack of education, lack of resources. And so it makes perfect sense that we'd be in a society right now where the less we know, the better, because the more uninformed we are, the easier we are to manipulate. And unfortunately, that is just a place that we're at. And I don't think that's going to change anytime soon.
Yeah. And we want to be clear. We mean this on all sides of the
100%.
argument. Okay. It doesn't matter,
Yep.
where Jen and I fall on voting, right? Political party, personal worldview, right? This is a problem for everyone on all sides, because if there's only one thing that's being fed, it's the only thing that you'll ever be able to eat, and you won't know any different.
Yeah.
Right. And so we could literally eat one another and never know that we were, if that's the only thing that we are ever given. And that is a problem. Right. Yeah. So interestingly, like, we go back to that, like, history and all those examples I provide, and I didn't even give all of them, right? The thing that all of those examples, historical examples, actually have in common is that it reflects those who hold power and whose stories feel the most threatening to that narrative. Right. So at the end of the day, this isn't really about controlling the ideas themselves. It's about controlling the consumer of the idea. And that's why people should be concerned.
Yeah. Yeah. Because if we look at what's happening at Board of Education meetings or town meetings, or who's voting for what goes in or out of a library, for example, it is rarely the people who are picking up those books and actually reading them that are the ones that are in the room voting in favor or against whatever the thing is. And so I feel like that's also kind of problematic, because, like, that right to access is being taken from you and you don't even know what's happening. Because why, in some cases, like, why would you? Like, why would it even be on your radar that your town Board of Education is voting on something in particular, if that's not, like, if you're not tied into that in any particular way? Or even if you are, we are so overworked, overexerted, overwhelmed, over input as a society that, like, adding one more thing to the to-do list to be like, oh, I want to make sure that this book that I really like doesn't get taken out of the library, I'm going to go to this meeting. Like, that just, like, so it's the people who have a bigger, deeper vested interest in preventing certain voices from being heard. They're the ones showing up to the meeting, not the average people that it's actually impacting. And I think that and I don't see how that's going to change, because it would take such a widespread effort to get people to do that. And it's almost like the same equivalent of voting. Again, regardless of what side, like, one of the biggest problems is that there's not enough people show up to even vote. So if we can't get people to show up and vote, regardless of how you're voting, it's the same. Like, how are we going to get someone to show up to a meeting where they're talking about something being censored or banned? Like, it's like a needle in a haystack. It just doesn't make sense.
Right. And I think if I read through correctly some of the cases that have been brought in, like, the last year, with titles and things trying to be banned in various capacities, and a lot of them in those school-oriented, places or circumstances. A lot of these things are not actually holding up in court because there's a vagueness as to why something is being considered needing to be censored or needing to be struck from, a reading list or curriculum or, whatever it is. And so, some of these things are not holding up. I think the First Amendment rights are continuing to, kind of circumvent, some of the pushes on bans of the written material. We'll see how this continues to shift, I guess, as the days unfold and we consider everything that's happening. But generally speaking, right, why is this problematic? Why should you generally be concerned as a human? What we're really talking about is shrinking the freedom of expression for all people, regardless, again, of side. Representation of those who often don't have a voice, who are invisible, they suffer, right? And so we start to overlook and forget a good majority of our people and how colorful we are, And we start to then just reiterate this old narrative of there only being like one canon of people and one canon of thought, and we ignore everyone else, right?
Yeah.
It shifts education and empathy, right? Because again, for reasons I already stated, if we don't learn about people outside of ourselves, then we will not have empathy for those other experiences because we won't even know about them, right? We won't even hear about them. Possibility of an economic hit to authors and publishers and indies books if those books are automatically not taken into consideration and published. We should talk about that in a second. Obviously, it's a slippery slope in terms of inviting just wider censorship. So lots of reasons to be concerned. So let's go back here to the potential economics of this. So Jen, you already talked about the possibility that honestly, like bad press can be good press in a way, right? So maybe it's helpful, but like, what about the publishers who are so terrified that they're not taking on the works of diverse people or diverse themes that are in direct challenge to like what the book ban is all about? What do you have to say about that?
If we go back to the historical context of how traditional publishing has worked in the past, it is always, and we've had conversations on the show, we've been doing this for 2 years now, we've absolutely talked about this in the past, of the gatekeeping that traditional publishing in the past has had. That was the only way people were able to get their voice out there. Was really, that was the channel. That was the way that like, oh, if you got that traditional deal, your book was good, you're going to get an audience, you're going to get a platform, you're going to make sales. The reality is that that is such a small percentage of the bigger industry now, because you have hybrid, you have self, you have service providers. There's a wide range in the industry. So I would say there are absolutely, including a lot of traditional publishers who are terrified of certain topics right now because they don't want to be in the line of fire. They don't want to be, to be plucked out by some random person who suddenly has a beef with whatever book you've just published. But the opposite is also true, that there are a lot of publishers and a lot of service providers who are like, yes, I'm in, let's do this together. And I think if an author, if you're thinking about your book right now and your book falls into something that maybe would be, and potentially be banned, just find the right publishing fit, find the right partners, find the right people who are going to support it. Because as long as you have the right team behind you that can make sure that you're producing something of good quality, well written, well designed, whatever anyone else is doing, you just may need to make sure you have their support behind you, because they're the ones who are actually going to control it, right? Because like, if I look at the books that we've published, I have a number of books that have already been banned, and there are books that will be banned. Like it's just kind of what it is. I have that responsibility as the publisher and as the owner of the company to say, you know what? I don't want to be in this line of fire. I'm actually going to take this book that we've done and like take it down and make the author go do something else with it. So it's almost like the independent publishers and the hybrid publishers and those service providers are actually the ones in control now. But if you've started working with them to begin with, what is the likelihood that they're just going to do a 180 immediately to be like, oh, actually, I was totally in on your censored topic, and now I changed my mind. It's on you, right? Like, so I think that's where I think that the like authors that are writing about something that feels like it, whether it's directly in the censorship zone or if it is just tiptoeing around it, just find the right publishing fit, because I think that alone will solve the majority of concerns from an author standpoint.
Yeah. Which really speaks to so many of the things that we've talked about in the last couple of years about choosing the right partners, values alignment, intentionality, and we've talked a lot about like things that you should do before you even begin the journey, right? Like really understanding, why are you doing this? What's in it for you? Things like that. And so I think in this time and space, right, in history, where we're seeing again, book banning, censorship, that kind of thing. If you are just getting started on this journey or you're in the early stages of this journey, I think that you need to really consider, right? Like, what's in it for you? And do you feel so strongly about what you're doing that you're going to do it regardless of the risks involved, right? Are you going to share your ideas regardless of the risks involved because that's how important they are to you? Or do you have other really large concerns, right, that might mean that you need to wait. And here's just an example. I was at a writing retreat here a couple of weeks ago, and we had a man of color there, and he has a beautiful book of poetry. But he said he doesn't know how to promote or market it right now in a way where he'll feel safe, because he has a very real concern that if he tries to promote some of his poetry that also has to do with social justice issues and race issues and things like that, that because of how divisive everyone is right now, that even to just, let's say, put up a poem from that book and suggest that people buy it, he's concerned about backlash or trolling or hateful comments, and so he feels just paralyzed with inaction, right? And it's like, wow, yeah, what do you do when the book is already there, right? And you have to figure out how to market or promote it in this kind of landscape when you don't feel safe because you are a part of the body of people that are being, pushed out, right? And honestly, I didn't have a good answer for him. But the reason I'm even sharing this anecdote is that we also have to recognize that some of us are going to have an easier time than others based on privilege and opportunity. And we also need to give each other grace, right? When you started your writing and publishing journey, the world might have looked one way. Now the world looks another way. And you have to weigh those impacts on you and your body of work. And I don't think there is any right answers here. But what I would say is, like, if you're just getting started, I think you need to consider the climate that you're in and what you're saying, and have a good long chat with yourself, right? Like, just make sure that you understand what you're getting into and what your plan is. And if you're already in it or on the other side of it, spend some time really thinking about what makes sense for you right now. And just remember that your book is forever. So if right now feels too volatile, then maybe you take a timeout and you try again later when maybe things have settled, or figured themselves out, or you come to a new perspective or a new conclusion or a new direction for yourself that feels safe and realistic and all of those things. I don't remember how I got there, but I felt like I needed to say it.
I think you made a lot of very solid points. Books are forever. Like, I know that, like, is it De Beers, a diamond is forever? Is that their tagline? It's the same thing with books, right? Like, books are forever. Like, that's the beautiful thing about books. Like, if we think about even when book burning was happening in Alexandria, however long ago that was, like, where they were burning just every book that there was around, those books still last. Like, there's still one person who kept one copy of something, who hid it in a floorboard somewhere, hid it in a wall, passed it on to somebody else. So, like, the knowledge will never go away. The book, like, there really is no way to, like, totally take it down. So if right now feels volatile and it feels scary, then just wait. Like, it's not the end of the world to wait. It might feel like the end of the world because you've been working so hard for so long with a clear goal in mind. And now you're like, oh crap, something's happening that's outside of my control. And now I have to kind of reverse course and try to figure out, okay, what am I going to do next? But I think it really does come down to, like, how important is this? Because I think the one thing that is the big thing is safety, right? Like, that is the thing to always take into consideration is this unsafe for me to proceed with? If the answer is yes, then you absolutely need to reevaluate. But if it is a perceived safety, or if it's just your imposter syndrome giving, like, latching onto something to make it feel a little bit better about the imposter that's kind of like surfacing from within, of like, oh, now I actually have to expose myself. Now I actually have to show up and be visible. And now all the spotlight's on me. Then that may be an area where you're like, okay, maybe it's not as big of a thing as I think it is. And then look to others who are doing books that are similar and seeing what their strategies are right now. So, like, in the case that you're talking about with this person, like, look to see, like, are there other people who are putting out social justice poems? And if that's the case, like, seeing what their strategy looks like, because is it real safety concerns? Is it perceived safety concerns? And, like, how can we find that balance? Because we publish a lot of different types of books. We have a lot of business books, leadership books. Those, for the most part, no one's trying to censor a leadership maybe business. Like, that's kind of like no one really cares about in terms of like the censorship side. But we have a lot of authors that are very diverse people that may be writing that leadership book that really has nothing, nothing censorable in it, and yet they're proceeding anyway. And it's like finding what feels good for you. Because for me, like if someone comes to me with a book idea and it's something that will be banned, I'm like, I'm in. Like, I don't say no more. Like, I'm in. Like, I want to support you and I want to help you with this. But we also need to take into consideration, what does that look like? What's the timing of that? And how can we make sure that this is released in a way that is safe? Because at the end of the day, when things are being censored and things are being banned, it's our jobs, I think, even more as an industry to show up for those authors who want to be the counter balance to whatever is happening. So like we have a book that came out about supporting trans folks in the workplace. And there are a lot of people who need that information right now. So it's almost like a disservice if that author was like, I can't do this anymore. But the reality is when that author like really evaluated it and said, okay, like I need to do this because the impact that the counter that this book will have on the narrative that's happening right now is too important for me to just kind of sit on and wait it out. And so it's just really so much comes down to kind of personal comfort levels and personal preferences on, how extreme are we willing to go with something? And I come from an advocacy background. And so for me, like when you're doing any type of advocacy work, again, regardless of where you land on any topic, you're always going to invite kind of criticism and hate and haters and trolls and things like that. So for me, like that stuff doesn't like really scare me, but I can absolutely see how the average author who, is just kind of like coming out of hiding and like now being visible for the very first time in this really public way would be terrified right now.
Yeah. And I think too, you have to kind of, the author has to determine what is real safety or perceived safety, right? Because I'm not in your shoes. I haven't lived your experiences. I might not have your identifiers, right? And so I don't really know what's a true safety concern versus what is a perceived one, because my experience is very different. So, I think people have to kind of be really honest with themselves and really do that kind of evaluation work of really understanding, is this my amygdala overreacting? Right. And there really is no saber-toothed tiger who's about to like maul me off the side of a cliff.
Yeah.
Right. Or no, my central nervous system literally feels so unsafe that like maybe I can't even tell if it's real or perceived. And so I just need to like take a time out, right, until I can re-regulate enough to actually do that kind of evaluative work. Yeah. Or maybe it's really easy and you're like, no, that's my brain overreacting and I got to get back on the train and keep chugging along. But I don't think that you can ask somebody else necessarily to gauge for you, is now the right time? Is this real or is this perceived? I think you can have sounding boards. I think that you can look to your publishing partners, especially if you have a good working relationship with them, to have those conversations to try to help you process. But at the end of the day, I think it's very much on you to make that decision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't think it's an outsourceable decision. I think, having sounding boards is really important here. And it's, going back to like, should I be concerned about book banning? The answer then is yes, from an author standpoint. A concern, sure, but should you let that stop you? Like I don't, like I said before earlier, like I genuinely don't think it's that concerning. But if we throw the lens of safety into the mix, then yes, there are reasons why you might want to be concerned and, proceed accordingly. But I think it's a matter of centering our reader more than we're centering ourselves. Because if our reader needs this information and there is a lack of this information, or there's a deficit, or there is a censorship around it, it's even more important than ever before for us to be the ones that can step in and add our voice to the conversation. So I think that that's also something to kind of like reframe. Again, thinking about imposter syndrome, it's like, okay, if I could just step out of my own ego right now, and I am safe to do this, okay, what's really stopping me? Because really, at the end of the day, the readers need this information now more than ever.
Yeah. Dean, yes. Synonyms, aliases, pen names, whatever you want to call it, is always an option that's available for kind of moving forward, but offering a sense of anonymity at the same time, a screen of safety or an additional layer, if you will. All right, let's wrap this up with maybe a more hopeful note. How do we combat it? How do we operate, within it. I think we've talked a little bit about authors kind of thinking about where we're at, in political climate, or just where we are with this particular topic as a part of thinking about their strategy and their foundation and where they're going. We've talked about safety and perceived threats, right? But like, what are some other things that you can do kind of in this world of censorship and banning at this moment? So number one, obviously, is stay informed, right? Like, you can't do anything if you don't have the information or the knowledge of what's happening. So there's, American Library Association would be one place to follow as a potential resource to kind of keep tabs on what's happening. PEN America, I forget what PEN stands for. It's so sad. PEN.
I remember meeting some folks from there, like when I first got into this industry, and they do like such cool work.
What's the individual?
Of course, I'm going to go down this rabbit hole in real time because we're unscripted.
Yeah.
Let's see who can find it first. Poets, playwrights, editors, essayists, and novelists. Okay,
thank you. Also, we're covering a lot of this particular stuff. Very eloquent stuff that's happening. So yeah, number one, you definitely want to be informed. Two, if you have the bandwidth, capacity, care, conviction, whatever it is, obviously getting involved. So attending those meetings where those decisions are being made, submitting statements, calling up officials, volunteering in one of those organizations that's like doing the work to fight against this, or supporting the people who do, right, who are fighting the good fight around this. And authors unscripted. I know the irony. The irony of who we are and what we're doing here on this.
Really, the brand really just fits.
And then continuing to publish and to promote your stuff, right? They can't take us all down all at once, right? There are so many people producing books. This goes back to the volume thing that we were talking about at the very beginning of this episode. With the amounts of books, the volume of books that are being produced, every week, that's that many authors that are also producing them, right? So we need to continue to write the works, share the ideas, stand up for the things that we believe in, put it out there, and then we need to find our people, like find the readers who are going to engage. They're the ones who are going to help keep things moving, because they're going to continue to show that there's a market for the thing that you're saying. There's a group of people who want it, need it, and want to perpetuate those same ideas for better or worse, right? Anything else, Jen, that you can think that we would want to add?
I would say, when you see that someone's book is banned, like reach out to that author. I think so often, like people are afraid to reach out to an author when they're like, oh my God, your book was amazing, I need to let you know. Like there's like this weird, like putting authors on pedestals. But like, if you're seeing it, like reach out so they know that they're being supported. There are people, there are readers and there are colleagues who are kind of also like, you can do this. Like you're in here for the good fight. Like you've got my support, whether your support is just you sending that email or there's something bigger that you can do. So I would say that. And then the other thing that I would add is try not to stay so siloed in your own belief system. So like when I say book banning, there are certain books that pop in my head. When you're saying book banning, certain books are popping in your head. Everybody's going to have certain things that are coming up for them. And going back to the First Amendment, like it is not my place to police someone else's opinion, someone else's ideas, someone else's speech. Whether I agree with it or not is completely irrelevant. So I feel like trying to just kind of stay in that lane of like, okay, book banning is happening in a lot of different avenues and sometimes places that we're not necessarily thinking about. So let's just make sure that we are equally here against all book banning, even if it's books that we don't personally agree with. So and it's not an easy task these days. But I think it's important because if we really want this to calm itself, it needs to be equal across the board for everybody.
Yeah, we really do need to be so cognizant that if we don't want something to happen to ourselves, then chances are it shouldn't also happen to the other side, regardless of where you fall on the argument. And to that point, we have a question Would encouraging folks to actually show both sides of an issue in their approach and then tell their story about it make that approach more palatable. To clarify, by fairness, I mean from both sides, but still sharing their voice.
I have always been like the devil's advocate for things. Like, no matter what it is, I am always like just a hair, and I'm not saying politically left or right, but I'm always just like a hair of whatever spectrum. If there's some assessment to take, I'm in the damn middle if there's four things. Like, it's just like who I am. So my instinct would be to say yes. Like, if there's a way to like fairly showcase the counter argument to whatever your book is about, I think doing it in a fair way, I think it could make it more palatable. Because if you're saying, I have this really strong opinion on insert X topic here, you kind of want to say, like, well, here's Y topic, and this is what I don't agree with. And that's where the validation of my argument comes from. But you're the writer. Well, we both write, but like, you're the one who helps writers. So what is your opinion on this?
I always think that you are going to actually earn more trust and possess more credibility if you can approach the argument at the impasse. Right? Your reader is going to be thinking about those other issues or potentially the other side of something. So when you can actually beat them to it and offer it, I think it actually makes more sense and allows them to trust what it is that you're saying, because you're not so blind as to think that you have only like that there's only the one way of looking at something. And from an approachability perspective, this literally just happened, not in writing, but like in a personal interaction with a family member. They brought something up and it started to get a little bit heated in that we were in disagreement on one aspect of this thing that we were talking about. And then they were going to throw up their hands and kind of, they were like, well, I know that we don't agree. So like, basically, let's just stop talking. And I said, wait. Actually, what I heard was that we agree on these 4 points and that we disagree on this one. But we actually agree on these 4 arguments, right? And when I said that to them, they stopped, they thought about it, and they said back to me, yeah, actually, you're right. We do agree on those things. And then that whole situation was diffused because rather than see how we were separated by one aspect of this thing that we were talking about, we came together on the things that were actually more similar, right? And the same. So when you can do that in your writing, when you can go, yes, this, but also that, right? I think that actually invites your reader into a conversation rather than a lecture.
Nobody wants a lecture on a book. Like, I don't think anyone wants a lecture, like a speaker who's
a lecture anytime.
Yeah. The time that's applicable is in an education setting when you are the professor and you are talking down to your students. Like, that is the only time that you like lectures are like expected. So yes, I completely agree. I think you said that so eloquently. And also, hi, Dean. I feel like it's more about being objective, and nobody wants to hear you being on your high horse about how amazing you are and how great this is. And it only can work this one particular way. Like, we really need to be more humble than that as authors in general.
And I think that's exactly why no one wants to listen to anybody else, because we are not taking the time to actually see any aspect of the other story as being potentially true or worthy. It is a lot of like, this thing is true and right, and there is no room for anything else from this other side. And I think that's what puts people off. And then they can't even hear any part of the argument that might be somewhat reasonable, right? It shuts down the conversation. And then if we shut down the conversation, we don't actually have the opportunity to transform any ideas. We don't have the opportunity to change perspectives. We don't have the opportunity to even just chisel away a little bit at the possibility of somebody walking away with a new idea, a new consideration, a little bit more empathy, right? If we just sit there saying this 100%, this whole thing is right and true, and this is the only way, then we are shutting the doors. And I think that's how we've gotten to cancel culture and divisiveness and censorship and all of the issues that we're talking about.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we've gotten there because of just the digital nature of our world now. Like there's less conversations physically, human to human, having conversations, because you're right. You know, if there's 5 points, most of the time I can talk to anybody that has disagreeing views with me, and we can usually find common ground on 3 out of 5, right? Like it's usually those last 2 things or last one thing that's like, all right, maybe, but we can just agree to disagree and move on, because neither of us can actually fix the problem. So why are we fighting with each other over something that we independently alone can't fix?
Yeah. When you're just blurting things out on social media, it's not actually inviting anything but a lot of blurting back in the comments, which is not discourse. Can we just all be clear about that?
Yeah.
Those are not conversations. That is not discourse. It is actually not all that helpful. So there's that. Dean, thanks for joining us live and contributing to our conversation. We hope that you found value in it.
His final comment, I just want to say, divisive books will only speak to those on your divided side, is such a good statement, because it is so true.
Oh my God, let's put that on a t-shirt.
Yes.
And then a bunch of people will be like, what's the word divisive?
And then that can be the back of the shirt. It says divisive and then has the definition.
Folks, if you join this conversation after the fact, please drop us your questions or comments or aha moments into the comments, because we would love to hear how this conversation landed for you, and if there was anything that you took away or that leaves you still further confused. We are not experts in censorship, First Amendment issues, or book banning, but we are always happy to tackle the issue as much as we can with what we know, think, believe, and hold dearly to our hearts. Before we wrap up, Jen, anything to share with our audience about what's happening in your world?
I would say that I'm just opening pre-orders for my new book. It'll be out in February. It is called Promote Your Purpose, and you can check it out at promoteyourpurposebook.com.
Amazing. Everybody, you are going to want to snatch this book up because the thing that every author hates the most after writing the book is marketing the book. So do yourself a favor, learn from the expert, and grab this book. You will not be sorry. And that's my plug, because I got nothing going on over here. Yeah, truthfully, I am in a weird spot in the season of my business where I am reevaluating a whole bunch of stuff. So I don't have a lot new happening. So I will just say, if you want to have a conversation about your nonfiction book or your memoir especially, that's my favorite, then please jump on a 30-minute story stroll with me. It's a free one-to-one conversation, super informal. It's a chance for you to pick an expert's brain, figure out what you don't know before you get going, and just having a conversation with somebody in the space that can give you a little tap on the butt to head in the right direction.
I love it. Amazing. And we will be back on October. I don't have the date. Sometime in October, we will be back.
But we might surprise you, coming to you live, perhaps in a couple of weeks when we're together, meeting in person for the very first time.
Yeah, we should totally do that. Okay. Now, coordinated outfits and
maybe giant pencils. I don't know if you can see them in the back along the bookcase, but there's
one. Oh, you weren't kidding when you said, yeah,
it's like an arm. It's like a 16-inch pencil, and it actually writes, and the eraser is real.
Wow.
I don't know how you sharpen it, but it's a real pencil.
You have to like whittling, like with a knife, just like sitting there out by a fire. Oh, yeah. Amazing.
Yeah. All right. And we don't know the date, but we can tell you the topic, right?
Sure. Well, the date and the topic would be tied together. Yes.
So we are coming back next month, actually, with a guest, so long as they can still join us. And we're going to be talking about defamation issues in nonfiction writing.
That's going to be a good one, because I think I'm going to be learning a lot from that conversation myself. So I'm excited.
So great.
Amazing. Thank you, Ally. See you soon.